As for the year of 2024, globally speaking, there are more than 100 countries worldwide are actually undergoing this political reform. Particularly when we talk about the nations in the continent of Africa. Some countries today are experiencing some major political upheaval and also some major economic transitions at this moment. When we talk about economic transitions, and mainly we're interested in this trade relationships. Post the pandemic, more countries today in Africa are actually competing among each others when it comes to this economic agenda. For example, major powers such as China, US, and the Middle East, and they're grabbing the attention and ensuring the quality of the services and also making sure that the order is still in place. In this episode, we need to shift our gear to one of the critical countries on the continent of Africa, which is South Africa. South Africa recently is experiencing the major political reform, or what we called a coalition reform at this moment. Well, South Africans are going to elect their 7th democratic parliament in 2 days, with the final result expected by June the 2nd. This will be a very anxious week as we await the type of coalition and leadership will govern for the next 5 years. How should we understand this upcoming election? And what do we know about this economic relationship between South Africa and other countries? And also, why is it important today for us to continue to pay attention to the continent of Africa? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Scott Morgan. Again, if you follow our show closely, Scott Morgan has been the president of Red Eagle Enterprises since its inception. And he's the expert among the countries in Africa, and he's a contributor to the militantwire.com and other major media outlets. Well, Scott, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you very much, Brother Will, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Scott, I want to get started. As we mentioned before, South Africans are going to elect their 7th democratic parliament in 2 days. And right now, we're looking at the word called coalition government. Help us with better understanding what exactly happening in the nation of South Africa, and how should we understand when we talk about, or when we use the term coalition government?
Well, for South Africa, this presents a potential new phase of government. As you rightly mentioned, after the end of apartheid, and with President Mandela and the African National Congress rising to power, since that date, the African National Congress has had a strict, I don't want to use the term stranglehold, but they have been the dominant political party in South Africa. They have controlled the parliament, and they have held the presidency for this will be the 30th year. And although during the last couple election cycles, there was polling data that suggests the ruling ANC and its coalition partners, COSATU, the Confederation of South African Trade Unions, and to a smaller extent, the South African Communist Party, have been gradually losing control. They have been losing votes, partly due to, for several reasons, which we'll get into and as we have advanced this discussion. But as you know, with South Africa being a multi-party democracy, and we're actually seeing the potential, for other political parties, basically most people generally look at two, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, EFF, is a challenge to the ANC from the left. And then you have a more mainstream centrist opposition party known as the Democratic Alliance. which is doing well, and then you had several parties that are considered to be the outliers, such as the UDP and a member opponent named Kwanka, who is one of the major advocates for freedom of religion and belief in Africa. So those are the parties that are actually getting the most media coverage. But as we will go further, it's time to discuss the issues that are actually that are actually rising to the forefront in South Africa.
Brother, I want to talk about this again. You mentioned it's called the African National Congress. Again, based on the report, that voting patterns and trends indicate that after 35 years in power, the African National Congress could by 2029 be relegated to the opposition bench. So let's go back to the fundamental question. How would you describe the power which is owned by African National Congress? And what does that signify if the power is extended or continued by 2029? So what does that mean for the country, and what does that mean for this political atmosphere in South Africa?
I will answer that question because right now the South Africans are asking themselves the same question that James Carville put forth to the American electorate in 1992. Do you want change or do you want more of the same? Because as you know, the ANC, they say, we've been in power for 30 plus years, and we promote stability. We have promoted stability and national harmony. But there are several factors that are actually working against them. The increasing crime rate is a problem. Eskom, with the International Energy Company, South Africa is always undergoing a series of rolling blackouts due to the failure to improve the national power grid. That on a personal level, I am actually shocked that that's not a more of an issue than it actually should be. We have seen that, like power grid failures and forest fires. We've seen that impact some races here in the United States, particularly west of the Rockies. But, those are the two major things. You don't see it as an internal factor yet. But, due to previous actions in the past, one would have to wonder the recent ICC indictment, I shouldn't say ICC, the ICJ actions taken against the state of Israel. One will wonder how much of an impact will that cause because they present themselves as actually being, they want to make sure that the Palestinians get a fair shake. There's not really a problem with that, but it came to find out the senior members of Hamas met with the leaders of the ANC before the events of October the 7th. And also, there have been two major warrants. Actually, I would just say three major ICJ warrants that were imposed on other world leaders. Two of them fellow Africans that made a visit to South Africa, which the ANC did not enforce. One was for the former president of Sudan, Omar Bashir. And when the government was actually taking the court over this matter, this is not President Ramaphosa, I believe. This may have been President Zuma. I could have the presidency wrong, but I will get back to you if I am incorrect. He made a visit as, South Africa is a part of the ICJ. Visit was made. He was not arrested. Also recently, there were reports that Hamedi, one of the Sudanese warlords, that have also been under investigation by the International Court of Justice. He made a visit to South Africa. He was not arrested. He was not molested or taken into custody by the South African authorities. And we can't forget in late 22 or 23 when South Africa hosted the BRICS summit, and there were plans for Vladimir Putin to attend the summit. And that, and South Africa stated that if the government stated that if President Putin was allowed to attend, was going to attend the summit, they would not exercise the warrant against him. With that taken into context, and then you see the statements by the South African government and talking about supporting the Palestinians like that, but it's like, yeah, but you also have a history of not enforcing ICJ warrants. So, and sometimes playing the taking the middle road is not always a bad strategy, but this is a case where South Africa, the current leadership, claims to be taking a middle path, but has in the past made several key decisions that when they're accused of actually being political in support of this ICJ case against Israel, there's actually standing against the South African government.
Well, speaking of standing at the middle ground, now, again, based on the report, based on the survey, that according to the recent election, what we called predictors, that South Africans may decide to stay at home or turn out en masse. To date, the trend is for a steady decline in the percentage of South Africans who register and vote. So in other words, based on the survey, based on the statistical analysis, that South Africans today aren't passionately about the current political atmosphere, or even they are less enthusiastic about participation. Scott, help us with better understanding what are the major hurdles and obstacles that more and more South Africans today are less interested in participating to vote, or even show less enthusiasm or less interest to register to vote. What is happening? Is it because too extreme, or is it because too complicated, or is it because too polarized? What do you say to that?
That's a great question, because in the last two previous election cycles, as you know, the polling data suggested that the major opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, were actually ended up underperforming than what the polls actually showed. That could be a fact. That's also a factor, but that leads to the point, disillusionment, because another reason why the ANC, was actually winning the elections as well is because, the fondness, they actually worked the deal out with the National Party and the white minority government. They ended apartheid, and there was still for a while there's still a sense of gratitude for ending that system. So that's why, in some cases, the ANC actually did well. But as you know, right now, when I use the term disillusionment, they're they're having, the ANC has been linked to several scandals, specifically with the Gupta family actually having access to state funds and absconding with them, to the Emirates. And then actually there were two members of the Gupta family that actually were caught trying to enter the United States in New York to actually disperse funds, and that also leads into one of my points is generally, what we ask, here in the U.S. generally people vote with their wallets. What's best for my financial well-being.
That's right.
And as we're seeing, and this phenomenon may actually be the undoing of Joe Biden in 2024, because even though everybody looks like the Democrats are saying, we don't understand what the problem is because if you look at the numbers, right now, the U.S. economy currently is still performing at the same rate as it was in 2019 before COVID. The problem right now is actually the inflation that was created by COVID. That's a major issue that's affecting the United States. And so, also another problem with people not wanting to do anything is the high level of youth unemployment. Also goes back into the issues about, the crime being an issue, because every so often you hear about lorries being attacked on rural highways and their cargoes being loaded. And then to an extent, you're also seeing some old traditional hatreds being rising to the forefront and seeing some farmers being attacked. That generally does not get a lot of international coverage, but it actually has been happening, been reported a little bit more. So basically some of these small things that could and should be addressed on a local micro level by the ANC are, specifically the crime and unemployment, have not been addressed. As you know, the population is younger, so most of the electorate do not still have the fond memories of the ANC ending apartheid. And so now the ANC is left grasping for straws, and saying that some of the younger, educated citizenry around the world tend to be supporting the Palestinian cause against Israel. That's a cynical point of view, saying that's why the South African government did this. To cut the case. But as you know, polls mean one thing, and as you know, starting on Wednesday, that's when the ballots are being cast. That is when we'll actually know get the true barometer of how the population is really feeling.
Well, Scott, I got two more questions before letting you go. Let's talk about the word economy. I mean, again, something that you touched on briefly. Now, if we look at this global economic agenda, that according to some of the experts, particularly some of the Western economists, now they came up with the term, it's called neoliberal economy or neoliberal economics. Now, Scott, you've been in this game for so long. You know that when it comes to neoliberalism, and also link the word with economy, the center of the conversation is going to focus on international goodwill, international trade relationship, the fairness, and also the imbalance, corruption, incompetence. I mean, the words can go on and on and on. But at this moment, when we look at the current economic situation and also this economic analysis in South Africa, how much would you agree that on a scale that from this economic perspective, this nation it's actually tipping towards neoliberal economic agenda or neoliberal economic polarization? What do you say to that, Scott?
I would generally agree that, because, as you know, South Africa is one of the 5 key pillars of the BRICS movement. And depending on who you talk to, South Africa is either the largest economy in Africa or the second largest economy in Africa, with the only economic country that could actually challenge them is Nigeria. So there are some. So there are some truth to that. But also I think so. A lot of the issues right now that are causing angst here in the U.S. Is more about not so much economics, but also political. How about the political issue? The Republicans in the House of Representatives have introduced legislation calling for a full policy review by the Biden administration on South Africa. Will this actually get through? I have my doubts on it, just for the fact that right now it's been recently introduced. Right now, the House is right now. At this current time, the House is actually working on the budget, and then pretty much after Labor Day, the members will be gone for campaigning, and then there will be like a 6-week window in late November, early December, when the House is in the lame duck session for any projects that when people are actually like, I'm out of, like I'm leaving, so I'll just do whatever that tickles their fancies. So that is the potential. But another action by South Africa that people should actually keep an eye on is, what's has also been another source of criticism has been the relationship with Zimbabwe, because as you know, the ANC, which was actually at one time hosted by the late Robert Mugabe, they, during the worst of the land reform crisis from like 2000, beginning in 2002 to until his passing, the ANC was one of the groups that effectively shielded the Mugabe government from more strict international sanctions, and that was specifically, I'm talking about the government of Thabo Mbeki. But there's after the going on, there's one thing that I have noticed is actually the status of former President Jacob Zuma, and how he has attempted, with his legal baggage, how he's currently attempting to run for a seat in the National Assembly, and the courts have denied that to him. So that is another as he's forming his own political party. So that will be another interesting wrinkle to watch out for later this week. As you know, and then the results are actually expected on Sunday. So that will, because, this is the, 2024 is the year of the election, always, people are saying that almost like the Chinese New Year. They're like, how this is the year of the snake or the year of the dragon. They're saying right now, 2024 is the year of the ballot. 70 to 80% of the world's population is having an election this year.
That's right, brother. I mean, again, statistically speaking, you're right. Again, based on the latest data, that the current population of the world, it's about 7.3 billion. And experts believe by the year of 2050, the population it's more likely to increase to 9 billion. But in reality, we're still seeing more countries are facing the population decline. Well, I want to end our conversation by asking you the last question. Since you mentioned China, let's bring China into our dialogue. Now, today, and also if you follow the news, that recently the Kenyan president paid a short visit to the White House and believed that the current American administration under Joe Biden is rolling out a brand new agenda which is competing with China in terms of the presence in Africa. Now, help us with better understanding. South Africa is one of the key players in BRICS, and also China, it's a major power today. How worrisome it is today to the US now China is expanding its economic influence and also this political influence on the continent of Africa. At this moment, should US government be very much worried, anxious, or we should wait until the presidential election is over and then we'll see some major or drastic changes? Your final thoughts, brother.
It should not go unnoticed that Kenya was, during the visit by President Ruto, that the United States granted Kenya the status of major non-NATO military ally. Only the fourth country in Africa to receive that status, the only one in sub-Saharan Africa. The other three, believe it or not, are Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt. Kenya is actually becoming more of a serious counterterrorism partner of the United States. So, supplanting even Uganda specifically in what's going on in Somalia. And as you've seen, that political crisis that has erupted there over the attempt to reform how people can actually vote for their president. And how another region, which has been semi-autonomous for so long, longer than even the ANC has been in power, decided to sign a treaty with Ethiopia to give Ethiopia access to the Indian Ocean. So that is another powder keg that is awaiting the spark, or in some cases may already have the spark, and it's just smoldering. Nobody's paying attention to it due to other pressing issues. As for what China is doing in Africa, they're actually kind of they improved their standing, because also last week they just delivered 4 UAVs to the Democratic Republic of the Congo as well. So, and as things go up, the year plays on. More elections are held, more risk rise, and then are abated. So that, and as the U.S. prepares for its election, there'll probably be more crisis. As you know, the insurgency still rages on in northern Mozambique and Bolivia, which, to the surprise of many, Rwanda has done a better job in addressing that than South Africa did, and that could be seen as another strike against the ANC leadership. So, lots of things to watch. We should expect some events to move quickly as normal, and we shall see. Well, and it's almost to the point, it's not to the case of what will happen next, it's almost getting to the point where we can ask, where will it happen next?
Well, that's a great question to ask. Again, right now, as we mentioned before, under globalization, not only we are seeing more political polarization, and also, as we mentioned before, countries such as South Africa, when it comes to economy, is turning into this neoliberalism, which is rather dangerous. But again, at this moment, we hope that voters are inspired to participate, and also to voice their oppositions and opinions, so that we can see more democratic countries and less authoritarian nations. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to our good friend, Scott Morgan. Again, Scott Morgan is based in Washington, D.C., and he is the expert among the countries in Africa, and he specializes in foreign policy and the trade relationships between U.S. and around the world. Well, brother, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay closer attention to the upcoming election, not just in South Africa, but any other countries in the continent of Africa. So thank you so much for doing this.